Hello, everyone, and welcome to Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. This is episode 370. My name is James. I'm joined by Ryan and Paul as the games are underway in spring training. We got our first one in on Saturday, not televised. We'll talk about that in a minute. But other than that, how's your guys' weekend been, Paul?
It's okay. A lot of sports. It's very
Yeah.
tiring. And I don't know. I'm glad we're doing this now, but I also could have slept in. So
Same.
strikes and gutters.
Same. Are we doing this early on Sunday for Ryan's football schedule?
Yeah, I
Doctor?
didn't. Yeah, I didn't realize we were going too early. It's just 8:30.
It's fine.
Yeah,
I would have
it's
been up
fine.
anyway. Just
I stayed up too late. It's fine. Yeah.
yeah. We had dinner at some friend's house last night, and then came home, and I got to bed at a reasonable hour for a Saturday, I guess. But yeah, no, the Badger basketball game yesterday. Whoo boy,
Oh man.
that's
I turned it off at halftime because they were up and on like that 16-0 run to end the half, and I was like, they got this. So I turned it off, got ready to go meet my sister for lunch, and she said, "Yeah, look, we're watching the end of the game. We'll be a little late. They're in overtime." I'm like, "What? What happened? Oh my goodness!"
everything that could
That's
go wrong, everything that
yeah.
could be done stupidly did get done stupidly. This wasn't even like a
Yep.
college ref situation. This was just like they turned the ball over for no apparent reason multiple times in the last few minutes and just kept giving Oregon the ball and kept giving them chances to tie it up,
Yeah.
which they finally did on a ridiculous kind of long three, but still they just kept giving them the chances and eventually Oregon cashed one. So it was stupid and it was frustrating. Yeah.
Early preview to March. I'm afraid. I love this Badgers
You and
men's team,
Steve.
but I'm like, I'm emotionally scarred. It's almost like the Brewers at this point, where it's like, okay, win a game before I'll allow myself to buy in. But this team is so fun to watch. I don't know. It's hard to say. There's at least more hope than the last couple of years in the tournament, I think, where it's like, yeah, they're gonna get washed by whoever
They won't.
mid-major. Yeah,
They have really good players. Like it's for me the Joe Krabenhoff line. If he's your best player, then you're going to get upset by a mid-major. And if you have a Decker Kaminsky, something like that level player, then you won't. That's just it.
Yeah. It's one of those things because this was one of their worst shooting games. I think it might have been their worst shooting game from three all year. They just could not hit a three.
Yeah,
if they hit
shot like 24% or something.
Yeah, if they hit a couple threes that they missed, and there were some that went in and out, it's a different game, and it probably never even gets all that close because Oregon kept going because they were getting closer and closer and closer down the stretch. Had they not been pulling that off, at some point, a team just concedes and stops, but they never did because they kept cutting the deficit. So, whatever.
super frustrating. All right, let's talk happier things. Talk Brewers, because we're still kind of in the early camp, honeymoon phase. Although more bad injury news that we'll get to in a second. Reminder as we get started, for those of you who aren't patrons yet, you can help support us just a couple of bucks a month at patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 guarantees your questions get answered both on this podcast and on Reporting as Eligible. $5 level gets you that perk, plus the additional exclusive podcasts, including the Minor League Extra with Ryan and Spencer. And Ryan, you guys had a little prospect draft. How'd that go out?
That was pretty good. I wasn't sure how it was going to work in terms of using it to create like a legitimate like consensus prospect list. And I think it actually worked out pretty well that way. I think we got something, especially those first like 20 picks ended up being what would pass for a consensus prospect list between Spencer and I. So the players went off the board roughly in the spots that you would anticipate, with us jumping at maybe a few guys because there was a spot where it made sense to start jumping at guys. And so I think we made some upside plays, but I think that's appropriate in this system because after you get by, there's really kind of a hard line after the first four guys. And then there's like another line after the fifth guy. So after you get Gasser in there, then you have to there's kind of another line, and then it sort of opens wide up, and that's where we both kind of jumped at guys and all of that. So I think it ended up passing for a for a consensus list. So I was happy with how that turned out. We'll have to try that again next year.
Awesome. Definitely worth giving a listen if you haven't already over at patreon.com/MKE tailgate. Really good way to probably get yourself set up for the start of the minor league season too, or at least spring training, whichever games are televised. You can get to know some of the guys before they pop up. So definitely worth a listen. As I mentioned, the Brewers started their spring training schedule Saturday against the Reds, but they did get some more bad injury news before the game. Blake Perkins fouled a ball off his shin and ended up fracturing it. So he'll be out for about 3 to 4 weeks to heal, but he likely won't be back in the majors until May or so after a ramp-up period once that shin is healed up. Obviously he's missing most of camp. So even if he's not injured all of that time, he's going to basically need to simulate spring training in Nashville to start the year. Given that injury news, the adds some context, I should say, to the Brewers signing veteran outfielder Manuel Margot to a minor league deal the day before that news came out. Seemed a little odd at the time because it's not like the Brewers are hurting for outfielders at the major league level. I suppose they needed somebody or wanted to look at somebody to probably stand in the outfield in AAA or upper minors at least. But definitely a bummer to see Blake Perkins, go down like that. Paul, I know he's one of your favorites. I guess before we get to questions on that, just your initial reaction after hearing that news.
Well, initial reaction, obviously quite bad. The good news is it doesn't seem like he'll miss too much time. And he's important depth, but for a month, it's not like he's so important depth that it should hurt them too much. As long as they have everybody else healthy, they should be okay. The big question there is they have some injury-prone people that do patrol the outfield. And so, like, if they do suffer another one, that becomes a problem. It becomes a bigger problem because Perkins is one of the sort of key contributors to their awesome defensive floor that the Brewers kind of rely on to be good in the first place. Blake Perkins is debatably the best defensive center fielder in baseball. He doesn't necessarily even start for the team, but if you get a lead, he's a guy you can plug in there to hold the lead. He is not helpless with the bat. He is at least a decent-ish offensive player, especially for a center fielder. And at least it's a broken bone and not a soft tissue injury. At least we can be pretty confident that he will recover properly. Bones are the easiest thing to recover from. And so as far as preseason injuries, not the worst one that you could possibly suffer, but it does, I think, take just a little bit off of their floor that they normally have. And if anything else goes wrong, then this starts to get a little dicier.
Yeah, the only thing I wish is it was like a collarbone instead. Like that, obviously you don't fall off and hit your collarbone very often, I don't think.
Yeah.
But just the fact that it's a leg means less running. So like while he's dealing with this, he'll have to be doing, I'm assuming, like aqua rehab and stuff like that. So he might be a little slow, just a little, there's going to take some time for him to get back up to speed, like literally. At that point. But yeah, this is, I 100% agree. Bone break, better than a soft tissue injury. And most of the time that he is not playing is going to be while, the team isn't playing games that matter. So that part of it is fortunate. The timing of it works relatively well. But yeah, he is really important depth and is such an important part of their outfield mix. They can cover, but like you said, if we start getting other injuries, and we all know how injury-prone Garrett Mitchell is, if we start getting other injuries, it could start to spiral. Though, I mean, honestly, they still have, if Garrett Mitchell were to go down, Sal Frelick is your center fielder, and you're not, I mean, Sal is not as good as Perkins or Mitchell, but he's also still pretty damn good. Like, he would still be an above-average center fielder defensively. So you could plug him in there, and you would be okay. But now, then you're really starting to, okay, now who's your right fielder at that point? And how are you, Trio probably bumps over there. So then who's the left fielder? And I think Margot is more of a guy that you want out there defensively than anything else. He really, really struggled with the bat and has been kind of a disappointment. I had him in my Dynasty League years ago and really was disappointed with what the bat became because he never got to be what you thought he was going to be offensively. And so he's more of just pure defensive depth. That's why I think if they do end up having to dig a little bit deeper, there's another name that I would prefer, but we got to get to that next.
And really quick too, like I feel like your ideal is to have Mitchell, Churio, and Yelich out there. But the other thing this does is potentially tempt you or put some strain on resting Yelich in particular.
Right.
I don't think that it'll dissuade them, but when Yelich goes out, you'd like to have the high defensive floor come in. You'd like to make sure he gets the rest he needs to play as much of the season as possible. Mitchell, kind of the same. Like he does, tend to get hurt out there. You want it impacts your ability to get these guys rest in situations where you still remain competitive in the game. So it does have an impact, and hopefully it does not spiral into more injuries that way too.
Yeah. Do you see? I think early on, especially, I'm expecting to see Yelich almost exclusively at DH.
I think that's what they'll do. But as you know, if outfield injuries start to mount up a little bit, then who knows? And that's, I think, a little bit of an added risk too if they start to lack for some depth out there.
Yeah, I still think early on they'll go with whatever. Yelich is too important that they'll just go with whatever plan they have for Yelich. And if they have to play your Manny Margot's or your Mark Canhas, they'll do that as opposed to getting too far away from what they think is best for Yelich, because they have so much money invested in him and he's so important offensively to keep in the lineup that I think they'll probably err on the side of, we would rather have some of these other guys in the lineup as opposed to pushing Yelich. But the temptation, you're right, might be there at some point. So you'd like to avoid it.
You guys kind of addressed this already, but I want to make sure we get our first Patreon question in. Michael Parr asking, does Blake Perkins probably being out to start the season change anything about how this roster is constructed? Do you just roll with what you have? Or does this mean that outfield depth like Manuel Margot gets a better shot? So you both kind of touched on this a little bit, but Paul, do you do anything maybe a little bit different on the back end of the roster to account for not having this Swiss Army knife?
Yeah, you probably do. You still want to have somebody who can competently man the various outfield positions, defensively speaking. That's really what you're missing with Perkins above all. Perkins is great defense, okay bat. You're not going to just get that randomly, but you still do need defensive replacements. If you can also maybe kind of Swiss Army knife it, Billy Bean, Oakland A's it together and get one guy with pop and one guy with defensive chops, maybe you do that, and maybe they did that. But it probably does look a little different to start the season at least.
Yeah, I'm looking at Margot's defensive numbers now.
Yeah, great.
Last year,
he just kind of sucked all around.
Yeah, he wasn't even good defensively last year. Negative 5.9 defensive value on Fangraphs. He might just be washed, honestly.
Yeah, he might just be a body.
Yeah, and this might be a thing. We needed more people in camp to be able to play the outfield for the team, and we were going to need somebody in AAA. So, I think that might be more of what this is. I wouldn't anticipate seeing a whole lot of Manny Margot specifically. I think we're more likely to see Canha, but let's get to that.
Canha. Yeah.
As you mentioned, late breaking news on Saturday nights, as we were just starting to put this episode together, the Brewers bringing back Mark Canha, which, for as much as Paul joked about it, nothing but Brewers left on the free agent market. They actually did one. They brought him back on a minor league deal. So they still have both Garrett Mitchell and Sal Frelick, good to great defenders in center field, as you both mentioned. So I guess, does it make more sense to go into the season with Canha rather than Manny Margot on the roster for his bat, or at least what's left of his bat?
Yes, it does. Manny Margot looks like a guy you kick the tires on. Maybe you see something there and can fix something. But Mark Canha is not what he once was. He is actually getting up there a little bit, but he still definitely brings some value. He can at least play he could play the left field part of the outfield. And above all, Mark Canha still gets on base okay. The pop isn't what it once was. I think that's really where he's kind of started to lose it more than anything else. But especially against opposite side pitching, against lefties, he's still getting on base at a pretty good clip. He is not helpless against righties. He can't really hit them, but he can take walks against them. And this is a Brewer team that can use all the offense it can get. So Canha was actually one of the higher WAR free agents left. He may have been the highest one left, honestly, as of the time we signed him. And it is almost entirely because the guy can get on base. So, yeah, you keep him because he instantly becomes like your sixth best offensive player. So that's the guy.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think especially pointing out that what he can do against left-handed pitching is important in this case. And it allows you probably in those situations to slide Sal from right field to center field, give Mitchell the day off because they're still pretty reticent on using Mitchell against lefties, and then Canha sliding into, left field at that point. He was also negative defensive value out there, but he has been for a while. So
yeah,
you're not going to get good defense out of I think him or Margot particularly, though Margot had to have been playing more center. So the negative defense probably contextually is, but then again, they put a more value on. Okay. So I think, either way, Canha is a guy who's going to be able to get on base. And you're right. The slugging seems to have dropped off. He only popped 7 home runs last year in 462 plate appearances, but he still carried an on-base percentage of 344, which was, more than 100 points higher than that 242 batting average. So there's something there offensively that you can get value, and it's going to be useful to have people on base, given that is sort of the construction of this lineup is trying to have people on base, I think is what they're going for. So, yeah.
Yeah, even without that power, 102 WRC plus last year, which, still low end for an outfielder, quarter outfielder, first baseman type, but he does have those old man skills, as you guys were saying. For what it's worth, Pacoda projections for him, his free agent projections, so we'll see if this changes by dropping him into AmFam at all, but Pacoda had him projected for a 233 average, 335 on base, and a 352 slug. So you still have the 100-point split between the batting average and the on base, and that's basically what you're getting. But they did project him for 1.7 WARP still in 102 games. So a valuable piece. 17 doubles in that projection, only 8 home runs. But he is better than their other options. I was kind of waiting to see if they would have another, DH first base left field option out there, and he at least has some skill left. So hard to complain too much about this one. We do have a Patreon question from Tricky Henderson on Mark Canha asking, can I kick it? Yes, you can. Can I feel the love tonight? Can I get a witness? Any thoughts on whether one cannot or cannot go home again? With apologies to Tribe Called Quest and Thomas Wolves. So enjoying the puns, Ryan.
Yeah, I enjoy the puns. I always enjoy Tricky's puns. So yeah, this is good. I think we're going to see Mark Canha. I think that he is going to be the guy that is going to break camp with the team. So can I kick it? Yes, you can.
That's the answer.
All right. The, I guess, big news over the last week since we talked was Mark Attanasio in his annual spring training press call. And, oh boy, it made some national headlines when a quote, or actually like a partial quote in a Bob Nightingale piece came out after that usual spring training media avail. So you had, locals mixed in with national writers in Arizona just trying to find their spring training storylines. A lot of people got upset about a part of a quote in which Attanasio said, is it my job to win the World Series, or is my job to provide a summer of entertainment and passion and a way for families to come together? A lot of people blew up about that, especially considering the Brewers' lack of off-season moves, at least non-minor league contract moves. Andrew Wagner and others who covered the team there, though, were on the side, not on the side of Mark Attanasio, because journalists don't take sides, but Andrew was the one to point out there's some important missing context here. So he basically transcribed that answer to that interview. Basically turns out that Attanasio was asked whether he'd do another big deal the size of the Christian Yelich deal again, and the more complete answer was, quote, it just has to be the right player at the right time in our life cycle. I thought about this a lot when we did the contract with Christian Yelich. It's great to have generational players that the fans can follow. We had Yount, but you get into the question of what is your job as a steward of baseball here? Is my job to win the World Series? And now everyone's going to say, oh, he doesn't want to win the World Series. But is it my job to win a World Series, or is my job to provide a summer of entertainment and passion and a way for families to come together? Because you don't know when you sign someone. I decided it was more so than what you could get for Christian Yelich in a trade and how that would go into the fancy computer model that Matt Arnold and his team have. So I'm committed to that. And he apparently kept rambling for another 5 minutes, talking in circles like he did there. So I guess, even with that additional context, I think it could be argued that the message still isn't great. I totally understand why some people still weren't, really enthusiastic about that answer. His son, Mike, who does the comms for the Brewers, tried to clean it up a bit, saying he meant to express that he didn't want to go into long cycles of rebuilding so as to lose a generation of fans. But we do have a couple of Patreon questions here. But first of all, Paul, it seems like Mark does this every spring. He kind of puts his foot in his mouth, maybe not the best at expressing himself, but he's like clearly a fan of the team, right? So I guess I'm not too concerned about what this means for the greater meaning of the Brewers, but what do you think?
It was mostly, I think, just an example of Mark needing better training / PR people, and maybe just don't talk as much. So if you're the kind of person who just wants to look at what he does versus what he says, I'm not sure any of this matters. This year, it's pretty clear they're not spending much money, likely because they don't have a stable financial situation because of their TV deal. And so whether he puts his foot in his mouth about saying the Nightingale version versus the actual version, I don't know that you really have to care that much about that, because, if you, from a fan's perspective, want the team to win the World Series, not sure this is what it looks like. This looks like saving money or just having a funsy team. Well, it's not a funsy team; it's a boring team. But I think in terms of processing this, it also is important in which order you received the press conference itself, because I first read Rosiak, then Nightingale, and finished with Rosenthal, and I think that you get different interpretations of each of them depending on the order in which they were consumed. And I think it's good to approach Nightingale with skepticism all the time. However, Rosiak, who I think is, let's say, generously down the middle for a local guy, and maybe a little on the positive side, still had some very damaging stuff from Attanasio in his piece. And so I think made it sort of inclined me to look at Nightingale's as more of a maybe that's possible that he actually did say that, because in Rosiak's he had a section of that where Mark basically said, I don't mind throwing money at guys. I wouldn't mind going out and making a big splash, but the baseball ops guys just tell me, no, we like what we got here. We don't want you to do any of it. Like, that's bad too, and nobody. I feel like that got overshadowed. Some other thing, a lot of things got overshadowed by the World Series quote that were like as bad as of quotes versus that one. So there's a lot of bad Mark Attanasio here. He probably just shouldn't talk without somebody whispering in his ear.
Yeah, I'll read that full quote because I have it up here, Paul. So Attanasio said, "It starts with what they've developed on the baseball ops side. I don't come in and say we have to do this. The team tries case by case to make an assessment on the value of a player and optimize for the value. And it starts with them, not with me. If anything, a generalization, I'll say, what about this veteran? And they'll say, well, we want to do it a different way." And that does read, it's rambling, but it does read like, no, the front office is the one that doesn't want to spend on these veterans that I suggest, so I just go along with them, is definitely the vibe that's giving off. And that isn't the best way to come across as an owner.
I want to be throwing money around left and right, but the guys won't let me. Like, no, you're in charge. Also, like, just parsing out the full quote, the full World Series Yelich quote, now having had like a whole week to think about it, my interpretation of it is that with limited exceptions, with Yelich potentially being one of those limited exceptions, that you sign splashy veterans for money or the fans to like, and it is not always in the service of winning. And that is better than saying what my job is not to win the World Series. But I also think it's a little condescending because yes, there are a lot of fans who just see a guy whose name they know and like, yeah, get that guy in my team, throw money at him. I know that guy's name. Like,
Sure.
But there's also a bunch of fans who like us, or not even people with podcasts, who are like, well, we have clear deficiencies on the team, and there's this list of free agents who would fill those deficiencies, and they wouldn't even cost that much, and you should go sign some of those guys. And so the sort of dismissing of the proper use of free agents in that quote is also not great. Like, it's not as bad as Nightingale's cut is, and it's rambled and hard to parse, but I think the real intent of it is still kind of bad and still very much a cheap owner kind of thing. So the whole thing I didn't care for.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he's not expressing his ideas well here. And if you're inclined to give him a little bit more wiggle room on stuff like I am, because I generally like how he runs the team in most respects, I could sort of see it. But he's creating problems for himself. These are own goals. He's scoring on himself. He didn't need to do this. And Paul's
He even
right,
called it out as he's talking, and he just kept talking.
Yep.
I know
Right.
Craig Goldstein and others pointed out, like, he had the aside and didn't think, no, let's not go down that road. It is definitely an own goal.
Yeah.
Or I need to find a better way to, if I'm going to go down this path, I need to find a better way to do it, because this is just going to end up with, and to be fair, nobody else, even Rosenthal, who wrote a very critical piece of Attanasio, he didn't take that quote. He could have taken that quote and run with it, because he understood that would be misleading, because that wasn't what Attanasio was trying to say. I think Nightingale deserves all the blame he's getting here, and maybe even some more. People are being a little generous with Bob, because reading that full quote, seeing the way Attanasio said that, he should have listened back to that and gone, okay, I'm pulling this completely out of context. He should have caught that, because it was not, even people who were doing, critical pieces on Attanasio didn't use that quote, because they knew it was not being fair to him, because it wasn't a true reflection of what he was trying to say. But this is all part of the problem, is he's not expressing himself well. He's not getting to what he needs to get to here. And the reality of the situation for him is, like, this is a tough needle that they are trying to thread, and there's larger discussions that need to be had, and we're going to get there momentarily with other questions. But he is not covering himself in glory in trying to explain what's going on from his perspective. And I pointed this out on Blue Sky, and I mentioned it in our group chat. Like, this is why the Baltimore Fail Sons stop talking to the media and, like, really just don't talk to the media, is because everything they said, there's really no good way to package some of the message here. And I think that's a big part of the problem in general. But yeah, there's other points I want to hit, but I'll wait till we get to these questions, because it'll work better there.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to those questions then. First, we have the Cheese for Wilson Contreras' Wine, who's asking, is my job as a fan to show unwavering support to a team owned by a guy who has little interest in a World Series? Or is it to point out that since 1993, one team in the bottom third of payroll has ever won a World Series, and that one time being 22 years ago? I'm not saying we need to spend like the elites of the large market, but my God, what the hell? Is there any information any of you can provide to me so I can regain excitement for the season, or at least care about this team more than Mark A does?
I can do some of that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously people are frustrated already with the offseason, right, Ryan? But this doesn't help. But
no, it doesn't. But there are some things that I can give you some information here that's. So if you go back and look, I did a whole thing on Blue Sky. I did a whole thread looking back at what has happened with the Brewers in terms of spending over the course of basically this century, going back to the start of this century, the ups and downs and the goods and the bads, and how Mark has gone from a hero who expanded, like, more than doubled payroll in his first 2 years owning the team, to a guy that people generally liked for most of his tenure, and who's become a villain payroll-wise over, like, the last, I'd say, 5 years. It's in the course of the years that I've been doing this podcast, who became a villain. And if you kind of look at, like, the trends in spending, especially in recent years, they were pushing payroll higher and higher and higher. 2019, they had pushed it up quite a bit. And actually, to make a point, in 2018, they had the 26th highest payroll in baseball, and that was when they got the closest. The furthest they've gone in this run was when they had the 26th highest payroll in baseball. After 2019, they pulled the reins back, and at least some of that had to do with COVID. Something happened. Yeah, obviously, when COVID hits, they were kind of around 19th or so in league spending when COVID hit in 2020, and then 2021 they were kind of around those points again. They were holding back on spending. 2022 is kind of the key year to understand what's been going on here, because 2022 is the year where they pushed to the highest payroll point that they have been in the ever. Like, the 2022 was their highest payroll point ever. They were at 131 million on opening day, and they were 19th in the league. And from that point, they have gone down. Well, what happened after 2022? The Diamond Sports Group bankruptcy happened in November through basically like January of that year. And they pulled back to 118 the next year, 104 in 2024. Now they're probably going to end up around 110 or so for this year. If you look at all of that in context, it really does look like they are limiting payroll right now because of the TV situation and just what's going on, which I don't think is a revelation to anybody, but like, I think it's important context that they were at one point trying to push higher and have pulled the reins in basically, and the timeline works out perfectly. They started pulling the reins in when the TV situation became what the TV situation became. So I think that from that perspective, I think this is more of a temporary thing. I think this is a circumstance thing more than this is what Mark Attanasio would ideally like to be doing with the team. I think this is a circumstance thing. And so we're in this time period at this moment. I don't know how much that helps you for this year, like wanting to get excited about this season, but I think that this is not something that they are trying to do for the long term. I think they would like to be running higher payrolls. They would like to climb higher than that, but they're somewhat limited. So I think for me, that's like the biggest takeaway of that, is that it's just, I think Mark Attanasio does want to win a World Series. I've gone through his entire history of spending and what they've tried to do. He wants to win a World Series. He wants to win. I don't think he is a guy who had just bought this team the way like John Fisher seems to have, just to have an asset to appreciate and to make a bunch of money off of it, and doesn't care about winning. I really do not think that's Mark, for a lot of reasons. The spending patterns.
He's at least become a fan,
Well, and like, I just think back
too.
to him running around in 2008 with those stupid goggles on like he was a player in the champagne thing. Yeah. He doesn't do that anymore. I think he's down there, but he doesn't go down and act like that. But in 2008, you saw it. He wanted to be part of that. He wanted to be part of that fun in a dorky owner way, the way that like people praise, John Middleton and Steve Cohen for sitting, right over by the dugout, where, owners that don't care don't do that. Well, Mark has always sat right by the dugout. Like, that's since the beginning. He's had those seats sitting right. Everybody knows where Mark sits. For the last 20 years, everybody knows where Mark sits. So I really do think he does care about winning. He has a different philosophy for how to get there. But more importantly, the circumstances in this moment are sort of not ideal. And they're not ideal for a lot of teams, obviously.
Yeah, I guess one thing that maybe contributes to the downtrend in payroll too, maybe it's just fortunate timing for them, but they've got a ton of pre-ARB players and, early ARB players too. So that's going to artificially maybe suppress that payroll number a little bit. It doesn't mean you can't go out and sign those, veteran role players like Paul's been talking about.
Correct.
But I mean, that's at least a factor. They don't want to block positions, and it just happens that a bunch of them are making less than $1 million. But I can also understand the frustration of folks here. second question about this, Ryan Ziegler's asking, it certainly feels like Mark A is mostly focused on his return on investment with the Brewers and not doing the things that should be done to win a World Series the last few years. Will it be surprising to anyone if he decides to sell in the next few years? I guess I'd be surprised considering he's bought like a minor league team and is really invested in that way, Paul. But what do you think?
I would be surprised. I wouldn't be that surprised. I do think when the baseball racket does involve eventually selling a lot of the time just to cash out on your investment because teams go up. And I could see a not too distant future where teams actually start to not go up in value as much anymore. We're actually seeing that already in the NBA. Forever and a day, the Forbes projected value of sports franchises has increased. That seems to actually not be happening as routinely as it once did. So certainly possible, but I agree with James. I don't think he is, just based on other investments that he has made. And he seems very interested in being in the business of sports generally as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you are interested in that business, when you actually like being in the business of sports, it's unlikely you're going to get rid of your baseball team. So I don't see that happening. I think he's probably around for quite a bit longer.
Yeah, I would be surprised. I know there are people that do think that he is that is a thing. Easy, I know, has been saying he thinks he's getting in line to sell. I just don't see it. He said he isn't. He said he wants to pass the team on to his sons, which that's a whole other thing that we could talk about, but I don't think
we'll talk about that in about a decade. Don't worry about it.
That's a problem for future me.
Yeah.
So that is, I don't think that he is looking to sell. I don't think, I think he wants to win. He wants to show it can be done. I think he wants to prove a point too, that it can be done and they can go out and win. And I think that circumstances have just been tricky for the last few years here, and they're not running at where they would like to be running. And I think really that comes down to, remember, at the last we heard, Mark owned less than 40% of the team. And this is a thing to keep remembering, that Mark is he has the, what is it? Plurality? Am I using
plurality, but not majority.
Yeah. He has the plurality, but not the majority, which means he needs to keep the other 16 investors. I think he's one of 17 owners of the team. He needs to keep the other 16 happy. And one of the main ways of doing that is to ensure that they have stable ROI and that they have money coming back from this. And so I think part of the deal is he has to be a steward for the franchise that way. And we found out, I've brought this up before, but we found out when everybody thought Peter Seidler was taking his own money and plowing it into the Padres. And that's why it was like, oh, Peter Seidler is a billionaire who wants to win. Turned out he was actually just borrowing against the future of the team, and that bill has now started to come due and is really going to come due in a few years, because MLB simply there have rules that actively discourage that sort of thing. Steve Cohen is doing maybe some of it, but he's definitely doing it more with an eye towards appreciating franchise value, because the Mets were way below where they could have been just because of 20 years of
Wilpons and Wilpons, Madoffs,
that is rich person 101 is get yourself an asset that only you can afford that appreciates in value, fund your life by borrowing against that asset, and then when you die and pass that asset on to your children, it will get a basis step up and you'll avoid having to have paid taxes on the appreciation for that. And so that's why things like this happen so much, and that is what a lot of billionaires do with baseball franchises and other big ticket items that tend to go up in value. So
I just can't believe Giannis ordered them to cut payroll. That's so unfair.
Yeah.
All right. Mark Podscarby asking, Ryan, can you expand your thoughts on fairness in MLB or sports in general and why professional leagues should or shouldn't desire it?
Yeah, so this got into a discussion that Mark was watching, so we had a little talk about this. Where I was talking to a guy, and basically it's a difficult thing. I think I maybe have brought this up before, but this is a really difficult thing to talk about because it sounds really bad, but it's also, I think, just the reality of the situation, especially for baseball. I think there are a lot of people who start with the baseline assumption that every team in every league should have exactly the same resources and the exact same ability to compete. That the New York Yankees should be on the same financial footing as the Milwaukee Brewers. And I just don't, I don't know when this occurred to me. It's been a long time now, probably 10 plus years, but I just don't think that that's a valid assumption to make, especially in a sport that is as driven by local revenues and as driven by like what's going on locally as possible. I think that the baseline assumption that like the Brewers should be spending the exact same as the New York Yankees and should have the same financial wherewithal is just wrong in terms of like what's ideal for the sport. I don't know that it's actually ideal for the sport. I think that the danger is that if you end up like, say, the Premier League, like you end up like European soccer, where there are teams that are spending, you know, multiples of 100 over what other teams are spending, that is going to be a real problem. And you run into a situation where there are a bunch of teams playing in a league that simply do not have a hope to compete. That happens in too many European soccer leagues where there's teams, it's especially true in like La Liga, where you have Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, and Real Madrid just dominating the league year in and year out because they're so much more well-financed than anybody else. And really nobody else has any chance to sort of win a title and compete. You don't want that. And I do worry that baseball is edging closer than I would like to that. And I think the biggest thing is the valid points, and like you can go back to what the Cheese for Wilson Contreras' wine was talking about here, that no team in the bottom third of payroll has won a World Series since 1993. Or sorry, one team since 1993.
The Marlins.
Yeah, has won. Yeah, that was the 2003 Marlins. Because actually the 97 Marlins were actually a very expensive team. They had spent a lot of money on that team.
And they sold them all off in 1998.
They did.
They did, when he didn't get the stadium he wanted. So I think that was Huizenga owns a team back then. But this is a tricky like kind of thought question. I don't think it's necessarily best for, especially like the sport of baseball, if the Brewers have the exact same competitive footing as like the New York Yankees. And I know that sounds, apparently this guy was telling me I was crazy to even say that. And I'm like, I don't think that's crazy. I think the problem is if you get so far afield that there is no way for a team like the Brewers to compete, that is a real problem. But like the Brewers have been in the playoffs 7 of the last 8 years. So clearly they're able to compete on some level in this league. There's a path for small market teams to compete. The fear is just that nobody seems to be able to win that last series. You know, the Rays have been there a few times. Cleveland's been there a few times with
Arizona.
Or Arizona with payrolls in the bottom third. They've been to the World Series, but they haven't won it. And so that's concerning.
That's because the expanded playoffs are really, I think, Pyrrhic. The problem with the lower third teams is that while the extra playoff spots grant them entry into the playoffs ostensibly, it makes it very much more difficult to luck your way to the World Series. You have to go through you could luck your way into one series, especially a small sample like 5-game series, or
Brewers almost did last year.
Yeah. But having to go through multiple high payroll teams through multiple series, your odds just start to get very, very low. You can win one, sure. Maybe you'll win 2 every 10 years or so. That seems to be what happens. It's just a very, very difficult thing to go through, like the Phillies and the Mets and the Dodgers and Yankees on the other side to actually win the World Series. That's very, very difficult for a team that is completely undermanned compared to those 4 or 5 teams, whatever. And so adding that extra round, it gets more teams in. It makes it look like the lower payroll teams are having a chance. But it's like the kind of like adding rounds to the NCAA tournament. Every time you have to go an extra round, it decreases the chance of you winning the overall thing. And it might decrease the individual chance of the Dodgers or the Mets or the Yankees winning the World Series. But in the aggregate, it drastically increases the chances of the high payroll teams winning it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing, though, that like the Brewers have made the playoffs without having to really go by the expanded playoffs this entire time. Like they've won the division in 21, 23, 24, and the playoffs expanded in what, 22?
Yep. Thank you, Cubs. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so like the Cubs getting out of the way and the Cardinals being in their current malaise of incompetence is also very helpful for that. But the Brewers have been a legitimately good team in that time period, and like the Rays have competed. The Rays have won the division a few times against the Yankees and Red Sox, and have certainly been like a team in the mid 90s for wins a whole number of times over the years. So that like the Rays, Cleveland has won, and granted also it helps to be in the Central to do this. Yeah. It really does. It helps to be in one of the Centrals. The NL Central isn't as bad as the AL Central. We got to remind people of that. It has been the last few years. The NL Central's been down, but in the 2010s, the NL Central was actually one of the best divisions in baseball. Everybody at some point, every single team in the division was good at points in that time period. Like everybody had multiple playoff appearances in
even the Pirates.
Yeah, even the Pirates went to the playoffs 3 straight years and won 100 games or almost 100 games. It was like 98. They had won a ton of games. So yeah, this is a really tricky one. It's hard. There's a lot more we could go into, and like I don't know. I have conflicted feelings about the idea of a cap and a floor. I hate the idea of a cap in general. We've talked about that many, many times on here. But the floor, I don't know if the floor is going to function the way people want it to. I think people think, well, that'll force Bob Nutting to spend. Well, is he going to spend well, or is he just going to spend? Like, yeah, he'll if the rules say you have to get to this point, then he'll do that, I suppose. But like, it doesn't, I think, make the owners of small market teams actually care more about winning. It would be more about like, we're just spending to keep up appearances, which we're seeing an example of that right now with the A's, right? The A's literally have to, the A's have their own salary floor they're trying to get up to right now because otherwise they're going to get a grievance from the union. And so the A's are doing that, and like, it makes them marginally better, but is that actually what anybody really wants in terms of the A's trying to compete? I don't think so. So it's, I don't know that the floor, the salary floor thing is the panacea people think it is either, but that's probably a discussion for another day.
We can talk about that when there's a year-long lockout in 27.
We'll have that soon.
Yeah. All right. Other Patreon questions this week. One comes from Price Trozen asking or mentioning both Brewers fanatic and Todd Rosiak have brought up Ernesto Martinez Jr. as an intriguing possibility at first. I like the idea because I'm a big fan of huge dudes in baseball. What are your thoughts on this particular brand of spaghetti for the wall? Sub question. Speaking of pasta, I wonder if Pan of Lasagna Jr. is available to play shortstop. Hashtag Brew Crew Ball inside jokes forever. I miss the Pan of Lasagna at short. Worth noting, Ryan, that Ernesto did homer in the spring training opener on Saturday. Seems to be generating a lot of buzz. I know that the media loves the guy because he's a good quote. He's really engaging. Has his own personal hitting coach too. Apparently, Fernando Tatis Sr. helping him out, and he's helped like Ellie De La Cruz turn things around. So I guess, not a big prospect profile in the traditional sense, but maybe somebody who could really help, right?
Well, so he was a guy who did get money when he signed. The Brewers did pay him money when he signed. It was like, he was a significant guy. We've had our eye on Ernesto Martinez Jr. for a long time now.
Yeah.
And he's an interesting guy. And yes, I would highly recommend seek out that thing. I'll even put a note here to make sure to put the I'll put a link to the video clip. It's like 6 minutes long. I think it's from Rosiak. To listen to him because he is an engaging guy, and it sounds really like from listening to that he became serious about baseball not that long ago. Like, he has grown as a person and has become like taking his craft seriously over the last couple years, and there has been this jump in performance. So I think that there might actually really be something here. I don't know what sort of brand of something this is going to be. He's a big dude, but he is athletic and flexible and seems to move around first base well. The story about him learning how to do the splits was absolutely hilarious. It's great. You need to hear that. It's wonderful. And so he, I think, is more than just your normal sort of spaghetti. He might just be a late bloomer. And I think of him sort of in terms of other first base late bloomers that the Brewers have had in this run, such as Chris Carter, who went through a time period where he was getting more serious about baseball as well. Or especially, I think like Jesus Aguilar and Eric Thames both had sort of that thing. To get a little bit more granular on him in particular, one thing that really stands out, I was expecting to see a strikeout rate like double what it is. He's a strikeout rate in the mid-teens. And for him hitting for the kind of power that he has and a strikeout rate that low, that really got my attention. And that is like the one particular thing where I'm like, I'm very intrigued to see what Ernesto Martinez is potentially going to do. I don't think he has much of a shot at the opening day roster, but I would not be shocked at all if we saw him relatively soon.
One thing to keep an eye on with him as well, he has definitely accelerated that profile. He is a left-handed bat. He cannot hit lefties at all. A lot of that profile is in with having the platoon advantage, and that's fine. He's hitting the long side of the platoon, but he has been quite atrocious against same side pitching, which can limit you, especially in having a lot of playing time at the next level if you can't do anything against it.
Yeah, so you're saying you hate him because he has normal platoon splits.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah,
that's correct.
But there's something there, right? Like this.
Yeah, there's definitely something there, and I don't actually hate him because of that. No, I like guys with normal platoon splits. You can work with that.
Yeah,
and there's definitely something there, and it's good to crush right-handed pitching. That's excellent. Most pitching is right-handed pitching. So it's just it might be a little bit of a limiting factor. Usually, you need to be able to at least hold your own against the other side. But if you can pound on one side, that's pretty good.
For sure. Cyber Cleric asking, Brewers are among 5 teams being reported to be showing interest in Jose Quintana, still out there as a free agent the last few days. What would a Quintana addition do for you, and how would you shape the pitching staff or rotation if he joined it? Paul, I feel like we've talked about not really liking Jose Quintana as a Brewers ad, mostly because he doesn't have the benefit of facing the Brewers anymore. But I guess if they did bring him in, does he slot into that lower rotation mix at all? How would you fit him on the roster?
I get it. Like, is Jose Quintana better than our lower rotation mix now? They do need innings eating and depth, I think, still, and that's one thing. When Quintana is healthy, he can give you, and did last year for the Mets. He's old and not as good, so like it's one of those where he's fine as with the pitching lab on the back end of the rotation as a 4 or 5 starter. That's probably pretty good. I can work with that. That's fine. But you are not going to get vintage beat the crap out of the Brewers performances from Quintana anymore.
8 shutout. Yeah,
that ship has long since sailed. This would be a very much old man innings eater type signing if it happened, which is fine. That's useful. But I don't like Jose Quintana and would prefer not to have him on my team, just aesthetically.
I mean, I would be okay with this. It's definitely you're trying to get the last end bit of a guy. There's some Wade Miley to him in terms of over the last few years, 3.75 ERA, 4.52 expected ERA, 3.57 ERA, 4.55 expected ERA. He's outperforming what you would sort of expect from him. And I think a lot of that is, one, he was getting defensive help. The Mets pretty decent defensively, I believe, over the last couple of years, especially last year. They improved a lot with David Stearns, but also just the fact that he got 170 innings last year. He missed a bunch of starts and only pitched 75 innings in 2023, but go back to 2022 and it's 165. And I think this could be an important piece from an innings perspective. Having a guy who could take the ball and give you some innings is going to be a thing they're going to need at some point still. So yeah, I'm totally okay with this. It's not going to be very expensive, and I think it makes sense for them. It's nothing to get excited about, but I think it is a very, very useful depth. And I think he can put him in front of this defense, especially. And I think he could do some stuff. So, yeah.
Next question from Postman. Why are so few of the spring training games televised this year? Didn't they used to televise almost all of them? Ryan, I know you suffered the pain and indignity on Saturday of being excited for the first Brewers game, going to go watch it, and it's not there. Only eight games on FanDuel Sports this spring. There's a handful of others, 7 or 8 on Brewers.com, but I feel like they've definitely scaled back the broadcast. They at least used to have like the shared broadcast with like the Angels crew or whatever. I don't know if the Bally Diamond Sports Group thing is factoring into this at all. What do you think?
Yeah, so Steve explained this a few years ago when he guested on the podcast. Because this has been coming up now for a few years because there are fewer spring training televised games than there used to be. I think it peaked like in the 17, 18, 19 era pre-COVID. Like that was when the number of spring training games televised peaked. And his explanation was basically it's hard. There's a lot of competition for people that are competent camera operators. Right. And
Indeed.
With especially with like March Madness going on, with all the various things, and also the fact that just so many more sports are televised now than used to be. So much is on TV, streaming in some way, shape, or form. You can watch almost anything you want on TV now in a way that you couldn't before, in terms of like college basketball games or whatever. So much of the stuff is televised now that just getting camera crews down in Arizona, finding people who are competent enough to be able to do this is actually tricky now. And so they just don't, the return on investment for it, it's not worth them to pay the prices that it takes to get these people in to do stuff for the audiences that they're drawing. It just isn't worth it. But yeah, yesterday I went to turn on the thing, and on the MLB app, on MLB TV app on my Apple TV, I clicked on it like 25 minutes before the game, and it said, this game is not available yet. So I'm like, oh, good. I'll be able to watch it in 25 minutes. Guess the Reds broadcast is going to be on there. And no. And for some reason, I couldn't even, I don't know why. I was asking Steve about this. Why on the Apple TV box, that app was not allowing me to listen. I had to listen through my phone and put it on a speaker while I was working out yesterday so I could listen to the game instead of being able to just run it through my TV. I don't know why that was. That's a little irritating, but yeah, it was a great broadcast. I listened to basically the whole thing. They talked a lot about Euchre.
That first broadcast since he passed, obviously going to be on the top of the mind. Yeah,
Grindle especially was not shy about bringing it up, and they were talking about a lot of different stuff. And actually, they did bring up at the very end of things that, because they say that for years, I remember this in years past, that they were joking about the fact that there should be a trophy for the Cactus League champion, for the team that wins the Cactus League.
Yes, the Cactus Cup. Yeah,
and there is now one, and it is the Iron Uke. So it is literally an iron ukulele trophy that they are going to hand out to whoever wins the Cactus League. Hopefully that's the Brewers. They came back. They were talking about it during the ninth inning, and then Vinny Capra hit his second 3-run homer of the day.
Boom.
So it was like, oh, timing on this is fantastic. But it would be cool if they did that. But that got me thinking about the idea of, okay, the Brewers are gonna have a home run celebration this year, because they always do. The Infinity Gauntlet of years past, or the helmet. Every team does this. You have the water fountain, the water fountain in Baltimore. That thing. Every team does something. There was what was the weird one in Minnesota? The hunk of meat, right? They were passing.
I don't know. Yeah.
So they had that, but the Brewers really should come up with something Euchre related this year. They should do something Euchre related. And I was like spitballing ideas for what that could be. Obviously, the ukulele thing, I don't know. That's already being done, so that would kind of be chewed meat or whatever. I was thinking they should get a jacket like the ones that he used to wear on Carson and in the Miller Lite ads, the plaid jackets. And they should don that, right? Like when somebody hits a home run, they should get to put on the Euchre jacket. And
Yeah.
that should be the home run
I like that.
celebration for the
I
year.
think the jacket's the best option.
Yeah.
I
Is
like
there
that.
anything else you can think of? A wig? No, that'd be weird.
I'm bad at these, but so many players are also bad at them. So I don't know. We've got some time to figure it out. That's what spring training is for, right?
Yeah. Work stuff
Trying
like
out
this
your
out.
home run celebrations, that kind of thing. So yeah, we'll see what they come up with. Mount Doom 98 asking about another big piece of news that broke over the weekend. Former Brewer related. Former Brewer may have actually gotten this changed. If you're Devin Williams, Mount Doom asks, are you more mad about the fact you shaved your beard and then they changed the facial hair policy in New York? Or is it more upsetting that your beardless face may have spurred the change? So interestingly, I read an article and, the Yankees, I watched the Yankees spring training game when they announced this on Friday or whatever. Obviously a big topic of conversation. Brian Cashman said, they wanted to get out ahead of it in case it became an issue for signing potential free agents. They never want to lose a potential free agent because of this. They said they haven't, but they just want to get ahead of it. And then conveniently, a couple of days later, it comes out that Devin Williams straight up told Cashman and Hal Steinbrenner, I'll go along with it. I'm not happy, and this may factor in my decision to re-sign with you at the end of the year, Paul. So I guess Devin Williams did get it changed.
I think he did, and good on Devin. First of all, not surprising. Devin Williams is not shy about telling you what Devin Williams is thinking at any given moment. But also, this policy is very stupid. It's been stupid, I would say, for like 60-ish years now, going back to the 60s. There's no the Yankees like to pretend that they're like it's very Cardinals of them. It's been a very Cardinals policy. Like, we play baseball the right way. We're very formal. We're not sloppy.
Better than you.
Yeah. Our baseball uniforms are actually just morphed actual business suits from 100 years ago, which all baseball uniforms are. You're not specially pinstripe assholes. And so there's been no reason for this. People have had beards and facial hair as a regular part of life for a long time. And I'm glad that Devin Williams actually put it to them and made them change it, because it's dumb and should have been gotten rid of a long time ago. So good on Devin for accomplishing that. He should put that on his resume when he comes up for Hall of Fame consideration. And can't tell the story of the league without Devin now. So that's excellent.
There you go.
So do you know when this actually goes back to? It's not quite as far back as...
I don't actually.
It's like the 70s, right? I feel like George.
It only goes back to the
70s.
They added it in the 70s. That's even worse.
And there's a reason for it. Do you know why? It was because they wanted to contrast themselves and be the antithesis to the Oakland A's, who Charlie Finley at that point was giving out bonuses to players who grew beards and mustaches, and I think is the genesis of why Raleigh grew the handlebar mustache. He wanted to... Charlie Finley, for those that don't know, is a very savvy owner, and he was always looking for gimmicks. That was where the Charlie Finley, just you look him up, he did a million different weird things to try to get people interested. He owned the A's after they moved to Oakland, and he was trying to court the counterculture of the boomers. Basically, he was trying to court
California,
that.
obviously,
in California, in the Bay Area, he was trying to court that thing and make that part of the franchise, and it actually did become part of their image. Do you remember the Jason Giambi cover from like Sports Illustrated cover from like 99 or 2000, where he's showing off his tattoos and his long wet hair,
long greasy hair,
greasy
looked like
hair.
A pro wrestler. He
looked like a Hell's Angel, really. Like you could see him like going to a Grateful Dead concert, with the Hells Angels. Like he looked exactly like that. And that was a conscious decision that the A's made to court that market. And the Yankees, I'm pretty sure of this because I'm looking at the timing of this, they wanted to be the corporate antithesis to that. They wanted to be the buttoned up, we're not that at all. And so he was trying to
shave.
He was trying to counter brand the team against like what Oakland was doing. Because remember, Oakland won the 3 straight World Series from 72, 73, 74. He was trying to counter brand that for his team that ascended in 78, 70 or 76, 77, 78. So that is where this came from. And so this is like culture war from like 50 years ago, and
Yeah.
it deserved to die a long time before this, for sure.
Well, it wasn't even consistent because you could have a mustache, you just couldn't have a full beard, which is bizarre to me because mustaches always look creepier than full beards. But again, like a very 80s Tom Selleck kind of thing, like, okay, mustaches are fine, but don't you dare have
Also,
sideburns.
You shouldn't let your rivals influence your policies to degrees
Yeah.
like that. If you do that, you've lost. You are the one who looks dumb and weak by doing that.
They're in your head.
Yeah, they're in your head. Don't do that. That's a bad policy move.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yep. So
Anyway,
yeah, this one deserves to go to the dustbin of history.
I'm trying to remember. I can't. This news may have come out on like an anniversary of Homer at the Bat too, tying it back to Mattingly's sideburns and everything.
Could be.
I think it was like the 33rd anniversary we're up to. It was at least off by a day or two, so it's just very fitting too that this comes out during Homer at the Bat week. So I love that. Good on you, Devin, for getting that changed.
And think about that as that was the butt of a joke over 30 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
Like, this has been a joke of a policy for at least that long, if not longer. And it's taken them this long to see the light. And apparently there were quite some spirited takes going on sports talk radio in New York about this. Oh, they
Homer
were
Yankee
not
fans hate it. Yeah,
not
Joe
miss an
DiMaggio
opportunity.
didn't have to grow a beard. Blah 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 blah. And it's bad. And even now, even though they'll allow beards, they've got to be well groomed or well kept or whatever. So I think Cashman said the Duck Dynasty guys. That's a little out there. So no Jason Worths or Brandon Marsh looking Yankees coming anytime soon. But
good Lord, I guess if that's what you have to do to sell it as like a short-term thing, but that's not a thing they will ever enforce. They will never enforce that.
No. All right. Well, I love baseball silliness, and that one's gone. So here's to more change like that in the future. That'll do it for our Patreon questions this week. Thanks to everybody who sent them in. Patreon.com/MKE tailgate is where you go. Just $2 a month will get you question priority, both here and on the Packers Reporting as Eligible podcast as we get closer to the draft. Definitely going to want to take advantage of that. We also give a shout out to new patrons or patrons who may be rejoining us, maybe just even updating their payment. Ryan, who do we have this week?
Yeah, I think that was just an update payment situation. But Alex Lamers, welcome back. We appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Even if you're not a patron, please do support us another way. Go find us on wherever you're listening to this right now, whichever podcast app that is. Give us a 5-star review if you could. Help us climb up those baseball podcast rankings as we get closer to opening day. And while you're there, be sure to hit the subscribe or follow button if you haven't already to make sure you don't miss an episode. And you're not going to want to miss the next couple of weeks because we're starting our, I guess, season preview series, if you want to call it that, in earnest. Ryan's got this all mapped out. We're going to be talking Brewers pitching, previewing everything Brewers pitching next week. So we'll have the call for questions up specific for that as we do a deep dive into what the rotation will look like, how the bullpen will play out first full year post Devin, and all of that fun stuff. So be on the lookout for that as we get closer to opening day, just a few weeks away. So thanks for listening again, everyone, this week. We will see you next time here on Milwaukee's Tailgate.